Today I want to share with you how Jewish people in the first century believed that Yeshua was Son of God. I want us to look together at the record here in Matthew 16, beginning in verse 13. Peter, who had been a fisherman, became a follower of Yeshua. And he and 11 others were his disciples, were with him for 3 years, lived with him for 3 years, saw the miracles, the phenomenal miracles. And in all of this time, Yeshua said, "It's not about me, it's about my Father in heaven. I did not come to do my own thing. I did not come to say my own words. I didn't come to show off myself, but whatever you see me doing, that you are seeing is my Father's heart for you. Whatever you hear me saying, I am saying the words of my Father that He wants you to hear. I come representing Him so you can actually see what He is like." And so Peter and the guys had been following Him around now for 3 years, seeing all of this. And Jesus takes them up to a place called Caesarea Philippi, up in the very northern portion of Israel. And He's doing this for a specific purpose. He takes them up to Caesarea Philippi, where there was a great, an ancient temple had been erected to Pan, one of the gods, the Greek or Roman deities, okay, Pan. And his temple was at the mouth of a big cave that was known as the Gates of Hell, because it was so huge and it went downward. So it's known as the Gates of Hell. So Jesus takes the boys up there to ask them a specific question. In the midst of all this idolatry, all this paganism, and in the midst of all of the questions circling around Jesus about, who are you? Who do people say? Who do you believe He is? So He takes the boys up there to talk to them. And when Jesus had come into the region of Caesarea Philippi, Matthew 16, verse 13, He asked His disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And Jesus used the designation Son of Man regarding Himself all the time. He called Himself the Son of Man, which referred back to what Daniel saw when it said the Ancient of Days was seated and the Son of Man was brought before Him. Jesus used that designation for Himself. And so they said, well, some say you're John the Baptist, who had been beheaded by then. Some say you're Elijah. Others say you're Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But He said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Messiah." I've got it. You're the Messiah. But not only that, you're the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you. Nobody told this to you. But my Father who is in heaven, He's the one who has revealed this to you." See, this comes to us not by, okay, I'm just going to look for a new idea or a new religion or a new thought. It doesn't come to us like that. It comes from heaven. The knowledge that Yeshua is not only Messiah of Israel, but He's Son of the living God. It comes by revelation from God Himself. And this is what happened to Peter. Now then, there were others who also believed this. They were all Jewish. They were all Jewish during this time. And Jesus, during this time, He was brought before Pilate. He was crucified by the Romans. He rose again. He was 40 days. He was 40 days on earth after His resurrection. He was seen not just by His disciples, not just by the few women that came to the tomb, not just by His mother, not just by His brothers who had not believed on Him at all until the resurrection, and then they believed. But he was seen by 500 Jewish people at one time. And it's recorded here. He was seen by a multitude of people. Now then, an interesting thing to think about too is when Jesus was at trial, Gamaliel, the leading Jewish scholar of that day, the head of the Sanhedrin, the Jews were saying this about him, that about Jesus, and what they should do with him and all. And Gamaliel said, we need to leave these guys alone. This was right after the crucifixion and when Peter and John were being interrogated. His disciples were being interrogated. He said, we need to leave these guys alone. If this is of God, it will come to, if this is not of God, it will come to nothing. This movement will come to nothing. If this is not of God, it will die out. We've seen it happen before. But if this is of God, then we don't want to touch it. Because if we do, we'll find ourselves fighting against God. This was the head of the Sanhedrin, a very, very wise man. One of his students was Paul the Apostle later on. But Peter then, before Paul came on the scene, Peter stood up one day and he started preaching, and it was on Pentecost. And the Spirit of God had fallen on Pentecost. The guys had been studying the Word all night long, just like you do on Pentecost. Praising God for the giving of the Torah on Sinai. And about 9 o'clock in the morning, the Holy Spirit had blown into this house where they were all gathered, 120 of them. And the Spirit came upon them, and the fire of God fell upon them. And they poured out into the street, and everybody thought they were drunk. The only thing was, they were speaking in the languages of all the Jewish people who had come for Pentecost. The city, Jerusalem, was full of Jewish people, but they were from all over the Middle East, and they had come home to Jerusalem for Pentecost. So here's this group of 120. They pour out into the street. They're full of the Holy Spirit, and they're speaking in tongues of the nations that these other Jews live in, and everybody heard them in their own language praising God. Everybody is going, good grief, what's going on here? And Peter stands up and he says, hey, men and brethren, this is not any strange thing. This is what your prophet, Joel, prophesied would happen. This is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, where in the last days the Spirit of God's going to be poured out. Your young men and women are going to prophesy. Your old men and women are going to see dreams and visions. So this is what Peter prophesied. And then, and he was Jewish, believer in Yeshua. Then there was another man, and his name was Philip. And Philip was a Jewish believer in Yeshua. And Philip is going down toward the Gaza, because the Holy Spirit told him to go down that direction. So he's going down that direction, and he comes across a guy sitting in a chariot. Now this guy was an Ethiopian Jew. He had been up to Jerusalem to worship. And he was coming home, going home to Ethiopia. And on his way, he's sitting in his chariot, he stopped, and he's reading the book of Isaiah. Philip comes up beside him, and the guy says to him, I'm reading something here and I don't understand what it is. Can you explain it to me? And this is in Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 8. And he said, I'm reading this in Isaiah. He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. In his humiliation, his justice was taken away. And who will declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. And so the eunuch said to Philip, he was a eunuch in the court of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians, and he said, I ask you, of whom does the prophet say this, of himself or of some other man? And at that point, Philip began to share with him about his Jewish Mashiach, the Son of the living God, Yeshua. And the Ethiopian said to him, well, if this is true, then here's water. What keeps me from being baptized? And Philip said, if you really do believe, you may. And so the Ethiopian said, I believe that Yeshua HaMashiach is the Son of God. So friends, all the way from the beginning of the Old Covenant, all the way up through first century, Jewish people believed in Yeshua. Jewish people who were part of that remnant that Isaiah prophesied, who would have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the heart to understand. And I ask you today, would you just once again open your heart and ask God, is this true? If it is, will you give me a dream? Will you give me a vision? Will you give me a revelation so that I know that Yeshua is not only Mashiach of Israel, but He's Son of the living God. Until next time.